What's up, gamers? Dreamcastguy here, and this is my brutally honest review for the Guardians of the Galaxy game. Now, right up front, before I had a chance to actually play this, I was very nervous about the project itself, because this is the latest Square Enix superhero game. Their previous experiments, The Avengers, it just downright sucked. To be perfectly clear, I actually hated the Avengers game, and while this is being done by a different specific studio, it's still underneath the Square Enix umbrella, and this game seems to imply that it's the same exact universe, but everything else about this game actually just follows that formula, but in an improved way. This manages to have better story, better writing, and way better gameplay when it comes to the moment-to-moment action. But I want to try and just break down every aspect of this, but specifically two big chunks. We need to talk about the gameplay, and we need to talk about the plot. This is a very story-heavy game. In fact, 2/3 of this is non-combat. Most of this game is just walking around, having conversations, watching cutscenes, and sort of just having people blast very goofy dialogue into your ear holes. But that is kind of what works about this. Let's talk specifically about how you're going to be playing through this Guardians adventure. Now, in case you've never seen it or you have no idea with what it is, the Guardians of the Galaxy is this team of crazy intergalactic misfits. It's a bunch of people who have very tragic backstories who have come together to become the ultimate set of bounty hunters. There's Groot, the Fluorite Colossus, who's able to smash people to bits and use some vines to just hold people in place. There's Raccoon, an experimental creature who managed to have super genius intellect and makes his own freaking devices to sow utter chaos when he's not just machine gunning down his enemies. There's people like Gamora, the master assassin who's able to take down any target in her path. There's Drax the Destroyer, this strangely colored fellow who has pretty much infinite strength and the ability to crush his opponents into freaking dust when he isn't just being a bit of a cringe lord. But the person we play as, the entire game takes place from the point of view of Peter Quill. He's the human who's sort of in command of the entire Guardians of the Galaxy squad, even though they wouldn't agree with that. Now, when you're playing as Peter himself, it's basically a third-person shooter. You have the ability to lock onto targets, you use your elemental guns to shoot lightning bullets, ice bullets, or just straight-up charge shots, but what makes this interesting is that Peter, because he is the fearless leader of the Guardians of the Galaxy, you can issue orders. So during the course of this game, you fight a lot of very funky aliens, people that just don't even make sense. There's random enemies like this gigantic cube of gelatin that looks like something out of a Cosby nightmare, or there's cops that are trying to arrest you because of parking tickets and stuff like that, or even times where you're going against huge crazy monsters that sort of defy the expectations of what you may expect in deep space. But during these fights, the biggest weapon in your arsenal is not just necessarily your super great guns, it's in fact friendship. I mean, it's kind of cheesy and sounds like a bad anime, but really that's the biggest ability of this, is that at any time you can command each of your party members to do special attacks that use their own special abilities. So you can make it where Groot will hold somebody down so you can strike their weak points. You can just tell Rocket to throw a bunch of grenades that'll blast people to bits, or even things like just having Gamora slice somebody in half with her sword. Now, this works good. I actually think that the combat itself is fun. The downside of it is the fact that it doesn't really change much. This is one of those games that's about 15 hours long, and from the first hour, you have pretty much every skill you're ever really going to use. During the course of this campaign, as you win fights and defeat bosses, you also get experience points that allow you to unlock new special abilities, which can be new skills for Peter Quill himself, but additionally, it unlocks new skills for your teammates. And here's just my issue with it, is that even as I unlocked a new special gigantic ability for somebody like Drax to slam people around and stuff like that, it doesn't really feel that different. This is one of those games where no matter how deep I got into this, I still felt like I was still just shooting people to death. It never felt like things changed that much. But I do want to say some of the upgrades in this when it comes to the workbench are incredibly important. So while you're going from chapter chapter to chapter of this game, there are literally thousands of lines of dialogue, and a lot of this is not just given to you in cutscenes, but instead is these weird moments where you can't fight, you can't really do anything, you're kind of just walking along and listening to people talk. But during these times, you also get a chance to explore a tiny bit if you decide to check in some optional side paths, or sometimes solve the puzzle to sneak around somewhere. You can find these extra upgrade pieces. These are essentially weapon parts that allow you to unlock new special abilities specifically for Peter Quill. Now, what's great about these is that these go way beyond just ultimate attacks. They change the way that you play, and some of these are incredibly important. The biggest one is that early on in the game, enemies can knock you over and you just lay on the ground until you die. It is very difficult. Once these enemies start knocking you down and again, you get stun locked and cannot get up, which usually leads to your ultimate demise. Whereas later on, you unlock this very freaking great ability that lets you basically turn on your jump jet shoes to boost away from enemies while you're on the ground, which is such an important ability because it makes it where you will no longer be stun locked. A lot of these upgrades are good. Some of them are just stuff like extra shields, extra basic health, or sometimes just stuff that lets you pick up different upgrades from further away. There's small stuff that can make it just easier to play, but it does feel a bit weird that this game doesn't really change. The combat itself still ends up falling a bit ultimately flat, just because as much as I enjoy these upgrades, and as much as I enjoy the fact that they tried to streamline the experience so much, at times this does just feel like a very, very basic interactive movie. Which brings us to the plot, where the Guardians of the Galaxy game truly begins to shine the brightest while also highlighting its final flaws is in the story itself. This game has literally thousands of lines of dialogue. There is so much different conversation that I can easily say that most of this game is just walking around, talking to people, interacting with the environment, or having just some interactive conversation choices where you get a chance to choose A or B depending on different arguments that are going on. Times where you get to pick a side or poke fun or sort of just have some very minor interactions with different people around you. Now, this is mostly a benefit. I will say that the most surprising aspect of this game is the fact that the writing, the voice acting, the entire cast ensemble, everybody truly believes the characters that they're doing. Like, what's great is that villains giving evil speeches feel fun. The heroes getting rallied together for that next big fight. Everybody patting each other on the back after a particularly traumatic moment. They really sell it. Everything about this dialogue and writing is just told in such a way that you really get sucked into the universe. You really care. And it's not because the universe is ending or that Thanos is about to snap us all out of existence. You care because these people seem to matter. Like every tiny moment, from just times where you see Gamora dealing with her past, or just hearing Drax talking about missing his family. They do it in a way that feels respectful, they do it in a way that feels realistic, and that is where I enjoyed it most. Where it begins to fall apart a bit, though, is the fact that there is just so much bickering. One of the things about this game is that there's a lot of random puzzles thrown into this that feel very much like filler. Times where you're just, moving around circuits to open up a door, or times where you're trying to use a particular person's ability. So each of the Guardians of the Galaxy has their own special talent. Gamora can stab walls, so you can do a double jump. Groot is able to grow vines, so you can cross gaps. There's times where you'll have Raccoon hack a panel to open up the next gate. But the thing is that this really exists just to have extra different dialogue choices. And for the most part, early on, I did enjoy this. I really did just enjoy the fact that there is just so many different tones and conversations that can take place. But after so many hours of it, this does become a bit boring. I hate to say this, but this game is best when the story is moving forward. But every single time you're just out there in the environment or trying to just get to the next major event, the characters are arguing constantly. Now, this is clearly done to be silly. It's for laughs. It's how the humor is supposed to do, but it got so annoying after a couple hours. Everything makes these people fight. Everything, after a bit, just makes them bicker. Like, oh, you stepped on my toe. Oh, you're making me hack this door. I don't want to do it. And it drove me nuts. Like, seriously, after a freaking couple hours, Groot was my favorite character between missions because he shuts up. Everybody else is constantly just bickering, and it's your job to break them up since you are the leader of the Guardians of the Galaxy. Constantly doing these dialogue options that I just wanted to make people just shut up long enough for me to enjoy the next piece of actual dialogue. Now, the thing about this is that I enjoy when the characters are being developed. I enjoy seeing them just interact, seeing them actually try and figure out how they should just deal with situations like being arrested or escaping some gigantic exploding ship. Those pieces of writing absolutely work, but where this is the best, the part of this game that I definitely love the most, and I almost think it's worth the price just for this alone, is the flashbacks. Peter Quill is obviously Star-Lord. He's the leader of the Guardians of the Galaxy, but this was not always the case. In the 80s, he was just a kid on Earth. He liked to sit around and listen to heavy metal and kind of just chill out. Probably played some Dungeons and Dragons and played some Atari games with his friends and stuff. And you get a chance to experience this, and it's so well done. Like, this is just more interactive cutscenes. I mean, theoretically, this is stuff you could just watch on YouTube, but the way they do it, getting a chance to walk around in this photorealistic house, getting a chance to see all these little tiny subtle hints of the entire life that Peter had to give up in the course of becoming Star-Lord is so expertly done. But more than that, there is some extremely subtle details that build the world in a way that I loved. Like, one of the things is that between the major missions, you get a chance to walk around your spaceship and have some optional dialogue where you get a chance to see how the crew is feeling or try and give people pep talks. But you can also find some small stuff, like the fact that there is always this refrigerator open. They always leave the freaking freezer open, and every time you shut it, Star-Lord will grumble to himself, why won't they shut this door? Well, during the course of these flashbacks, I discovered that in the basement, this is because your mom also would leave the refrigerator open. Getting a chance to shut it, you would see that this is just a lifelong pet peeve. It's always been his chore to shut the freaking refrigerator for his entire existence. It is a tiny freaking clue that makes this world feel more realistic, more alive. It makes me feel like this stuff matters, even if you're not going against Thanos, even if you're not teaming up with Captain America. It really makes this stuff feel like it has a bit of gravitas. It makes it have this sense of realism that's not just about saving the universe, and that is where I loved it the most. Now, the last thing I do want to talk about is glitches, because I did have some throughout the course of this game. There was only one time where my game fully crashed, and it wasn't that big of a deal, but for the most part, it feels like sometimes enemies would glitch out and just stand there, but the main thing I had, and I have no idea why this popped up so much, is blinking textures. Now, this is super bizarre, but it only popped up while I was inside of the space stations. But seriously, during the course of getting a chance to explore these different environments, a lot of times paint would flicker. Now, this happens throughout the entire game. I have no idea why. There are some incredibly, just stunningly gorgeous environments at times, and it looked a little bit weird when you start seeing textures blinking into and out of existence. No idea what caused this, but it's one of those things that definitely kind of annoyed me at times. There were also a few small audio glitches, just with people sounding incredibly loud or incredibly quiet, but this was stuff that I feel like I could kind of overlook because it's clearly going to be patched. I'm actually impressed with just how much they managed to make the Guardians of the Galaxy game feel important, but I do want to say one last cryptic downside. I can't say exactly what happens, but this game clearly is setting up for a sequel. This game is heavily implying a Marvel Cinematic Universe style team up. Like, this is made by the Avengers people. At one point, you hear the Avengers voices. It's very much setting up a futuristic Guardians of the Galaxy meets everybody, and they have a gigantic adventure style experience that I don't think is going to happen. I just have a feeling that this game might not sell a bunch. I have a feeling that it's not going to have that mass appeal. I just get the feeling that this is the very last of this universe. And to be perfectly honest, I'm very sad about that. This is not in my top 10 games of the year. This is not something I feel like is going to be for everybody, but I do wish that somehow we got just one more game in this specific universe so I could figure out what it is they're trying to do, because I would definitely come back for another taste of this universe just to see what's actually going on. Okay, so we've heard some good and some bad, but let's go over the ratings board and put a big number on it. I am giving the Guardians of the Galaxy game an 8 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching, gamers. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a gigantic thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. This video has been incredibly fun to write. It was nice to beat this game, but recording this audio was a gigantic pain. For some reason, they decided to chop down a bunch of trees outside my house, so if you heard any chainsaws or anything, I sincerely apologize. Alright, it took me 2 hours of talking into this microphone to record this freaking video. I'm gonna go lay down on my bed. I love you very much, so please join me and keep dreaming. Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.